Hi there. Thanks for clicking on the link, and please do subscribe to the channel if you're involved in electrical installations at all or want to know about off-grid living. Basically, I thought I'd do a quick video on selecting the correct kind of inverter. It's quite a long subject, this one, but I'm going to give you some short ideas just to have a think about. So the first question is always going to be what you're trying to run with your inverter, and that can be a combination of two things. It's the maximum momentary demand of energy, and also what you're trying to run all together at one time. So for example, if you have a vehicle which has lighting, a laptop charger, maybe a TV and a fridge that you want to run on mains, that's absolutely fine. You add those together and they're pretty much continuous ratings. However, both the fridge and the TV will have surge demand as well. So you can't just add up all your wattage ratings from your equipment and say, okay, that's 1,000 watts, so I'll buy a 1,000 watt inverter. You're probably going to need something a bit bigger to get things going. So for example, a television can have a very high surge, up to 10 times the normal run power requirement. So in other words, if it's a 50 watt TV, it might have a surge requirement of 500 watts to get it going. And similarly with a fridge, which has an induction load, a pump, that can draw a lot more power in when it's first firing up than it will do once it's running. So you do need to size your inverter accordingly. The other question is how often? So this will determine what grade of inverter you buy. I'm always going to suggest that you buy a professional quality inverter. Basically, I think that cheap kind of leisure type products are a bit of a false economy. There are some good ones out there, but generally speaking, you're going to be limited to what you can run on them. I think of the kind of product that you should buy should be something which obviously you can afford, but also is well put together and from a reputable manufacturer, especially considering that you're dealing with potentially lethal voltages if something goes wrong with the product, and also just the inconvenience of not having power when you want it because your cheap inverter decided to give up the ghost at just the wrong moment. The next question is pure or modified sine wave. I'd always select pure. They are more expensive, but you'll run your equipment a lot easier than you would with a modified sine wave. So basically the difference is a pure sine wave inverter has a smooth waveform, exactly like you would get from a quality main source from the grid, i.e. when you plug into your wall, that's sine wave AC power. Modified sine wave is an approximation of it, and it's made up of lots of tiny little steps. Now the problem with that is if you've got equipment that has things like timers, say for example a microwave, the digital timer is looking for points on the waveform in order to operate correctly, and it may not operate correctly if those points on the waveform aren't there because the step is just taking the waveform slightly out of the way. The other thing is your equipment will run more than likely hotter and less efficiently, which creates wear and tear on both the inverter and the equipment. So modified sine wave will run a lot of things, but it's a bit like putting dirty fuel in your car. It's not something you choose to do if you didn't have to. That said, if your budget is very constrained, better to have it than not. DC voltage. Most vehicles are 12 volt. There are obviously some 24 volt motorhomes, and there's an increase now in people using 48 volt systems. And what's driving that is the size of the cabling for the inverter, which is quite a big subject all on its own. Basically, you have very high currents traveling through the DC positive and negative cable from the battery bank to the inverter. And the bigger the DC voltage, the smaller the cable needs to be. So of course that impacts on cost, and also the lower amps mean that you don't have so much power drawing through, which is putting less strain on your batteries. So go higher if you can, but then there are some knock-on effects of that. If you go, for example, for a 24 volt inverter, but you have a 12 volt alternator on your vehicle, then you need to think about how you're going to be able to step up the DC voltage from the vehicle in order to charge the batteries when your vehicle is running. And some people choose not to do that, but that again requires you then to think about greater battery capacity to store more energy for your purposes, or to think about alternative charging sources such as solar. In terms of recharging batteries, the bigger the inverter goes, the more watts there are, the higher the amps draw is going to be. And if you run those high amps draw loads for any kind of extended period, then you're going to have an awful lot of draw on the battery. Now, there's a limit to how much solar energy you can put into a battery. So you may want to think about having alternative charging sources, such as the vehicle, but also if it's a really big battery bank, maybe the alternator is going to struggle as well unless you've got something specialist fitted. So you probably want to consider if you're going for a really big inverter, opt rather for an inverter charger. And the nice thing about that is it can act as a UPS system. So in other words, an uninterrupted power supply. So when you plug into when you're driving along and your fridge and other equipment's running on mains, inverted from your batteries, when you get to your destination, if there's a landline or a generator that you can plug into, a UPS system will switch over and run your loads without any break, and it will also then charge up your batteries. So it's a good way to avoid having to move your plugs around in the vehicle, or to have any disruption to the power supply. And also it means that you don't have to have more than one ring main, one for mains and one for inverted mains. So you can just use one ring main on the vehicle. So if you're looking for a big inverter, then look at inverter chargers, which include obviously a large charger and an automatic transfer relay, which gives you the UPS function. In terms of sizing then, just quickly, if I was you, I'd be looking to go bigger rather than smaller. And the reason for that is, like anything else, if you redline it, a bit like an engine, if you sat with your engine in the red line, there's a good chance it's not going to last very long. And it's the same with power electronics. If you run them at their full power continuously or regularly, then the wear and tear on the components is a lot greater than if you're using it in a minimal kind of way. So always go a bit bigger than you really feel you need to, because you'll have less wear and tear on the product. It won't get as hot, and that should give you more years of performance out of it. Of course, there's a balance to that, which is cost and also size and weight on the vehicle, but go as big as you can. And that also means you're not going to limit yourself. So for example, lots of people say to me, I want to fit an inverter on my camper van so that I can charge up my my laptop. Well, that's great. And then they say, I'd like my wife to be able to run anything that she wants. It sounds a bit sexist, but it's true that usually the item that they tell us about is a hairdryer. And when you think that your domestic hairdryer or anything decent is going to be about 1800 watts, now you're up to basically maybe a minimum 2 kilowatt inverter. But if you're going to do the cabling and the installation for that, why not go for something that will allow you to run maybe an induction hob as well? And that again will make cooking on the vehicle convenient. You're going to need some pretty hefty batteries for this system, so why not go the whole hog? And usually what I recommend to people is a 3 kVA combi unit, i.e. Victron Multi 3 kVA unit. The kVA is actually volt amps, and that's not the same as watts. So basically your continuous rating of a 3 kVA combi unit is about 2400 watts, and that's adequate to run a single induction hob on about half power, which is quite a quick cook and doesn't put too much strain on the batteries. But it also means you've got enough power there to run other domestic equipment, and it's also a very popular product. So should you ever wish to sell your vehicle or move, or for example use it in a different the equipment in a different application, like an off-grid house application, for example, you've already got the kit, and it's something that you'll be able to sell on with a decent return. So invest in the better stuff, invest big if you can. Just bear in mind that the size does impact on the rest of the system, so the number of batteries, the size of cable, and the overall cost of it, but it is worth the investment. I hope it's given you some ideas anyway. Fire away, ask some questions if you've got any, and I'll answer them in the comments or in another video, and please subscribe to the channel. Cheers.